Okay,
Still
Okay,
booting up.
we're on. We're on YouTube. Go ahead, Daryl.
all right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight. I'm Daryl Kaneinenbelt, and thank you for joining us for the power of planetariums, past, present, and future. And tonight is about connecting Toronto's planetarium legacy with what's happening around in the world, in our cosmos, and what the future could look like here at
Go ahead,
home.
Daryl.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight. I'm Daryl Kaneinenbelt, and thank you for joining us. I hear myself just speaking back to me, so I'm just going to pause there for a second. Past, present. I'm just going to pause there for a second, guys. I hear myself play back after I speak. So you want me to just keep going here? Okay. So as I was saying, we're talking about the planetarium tonight, what the future could look like here at home. So before we begin, I first want to do an important thing. I want to acknowledge the traditional territories where many of us are joining from and recognize the Indigenous communities that have cared for this land for generations. So let's respectfully take a pause and reflect on what I just said. Thank you. Now, Space Place Canada. That's why we're here tonight. Space Place Canada is a registered Canadian charity working to bring a world-class public planetarium back to Toronto. If tonight's discussion inspires you, we also need your help. We invite you to support Space Place Canada. Your support and a donation really helps us move toward building a new public planetarium. It is a place for learning, curiosity, and community for future generations. And so what we're asking for tonight, and even in the future as we move forward with our plan and advocacy for the planetarium, we're asking for financial support so we can do more events like this, fundraising recruitments, and even help us in generating prospective locations for the physical planetarium. Now, tonight we are joined by really three amazing people that you see on the screen. Kirsten Vanstone is a science communication leader with deep experience across museums and planetariums, and she's an active volunteer with the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Kirsten is a not-for-profit manager specializing in organizations connected with science and STEMs, and she also has a BSc in astronomy and physics and a master's degree in science communication. Kirsten is from Toronto, where her first job was working the elevators at the CN Tower. Kirsten, I'm sure you have a few stories to share, maybe for another YouTube. Richard McDonald is a retired IBM distinguished engineer and former theater operator at the McLaughlin Planetarium. One of his passions is the development of technical skills in young people. He's also an active volunteer at First Canada and mentor at University of Toronto. And while he was studying astronomy and computer sciences at U of T, he worked as a part-time lecturer and theater operator at the McLaughlin Planetarium. And then finally, Ryan Marciniak is an astrophysicist and founder of Astronomy in Action, bringing planetarium experiences directly into communities. His company, Astronomy in Action, has tens of thousands of visitors each year, performing school programs and public planetarium shows, really in a fleet of inflatable planetarium domes. Ryan also appeared as an expert astronomer for media appearances with some major networks across Canada, CBC, CTV, the History Channel, 680 News Radio, and many, many more. So all three of you, really, thank you for being here tonight. And I want to start off with basically kind of the run of show. All three of you will take some time, about 20 minutes apiece each, to talk about your views on the planetarium. And then maybe we'll have some time for some open Q&A. We hope to go till about 8:30 tonight. But to kick things off, I want to start off with one question in terms of what role did planetariums play in your own journey, and why do they still matter to you today? Kirsten, why don't you start?
There, unmuted. I first went to a planetarium. I went to the McLaughlin Planetarium when I was about 7. And to this day, I remember the fade out of the light from the walk-in to the first appearance of the stars. They used to use a red color fade out that was really unique. And the feeling in my gut when that happened was something I remember to now. I love the night sky, and to be able to go and basically play with it in the middle of the daytime was an incredible experience. I also had the fortune of working in a few planetariums in my life, and it is a unique place to be. It's a unique place to not only visit but also to to work and experience. But I'm going to go back. That fade out at McLaughlin is really what hooked me.
That way we go around the room with the others. You guys can answer that question, and then you guys can carry on. Maybe Ryan next.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks, Daryl. I'm really excited to talk about planetariums, despite spending almost every day inside one. It's thousands upon thousands of hours of my life have been spent presenting in planetariums, and so they're very near and dear to my heart, although I spend a lot of time in the ones that I have to set up myself and carry and move around. But for me, it's a canvas. I get to share my knowledge and passion for astronomy that I've had since I was young and connect with people on a very deep level. Everyone is a little bit connected to space and a little bit connected to the universe. And inside a planetarium, I get to grow that connection with audiences, whether it's kids or adults. I always say we can do programs for ages 3 to 103. But that's one of the powers of the planetarium that I'm sure we'll all touch on a little bit more. So I hope to get another 10,000, 20,000, however many hours in the planetarium I can for the rest of my life, and hopefully in a large international planetarium right here in the Greater Toronto area that we're all very proud of.
Richard, go ahead.
Unmuting. Richard McDonald. I'm my first hook on astronomy was through school and through great teachers that I had that inspired me to get interested in astronomy. I was also lucky that there was an active astronomy club in Toronto. And when I was looking for work as a part-time work as a student, the opportunity to work at the planetarium came up, and it was just an amazing experience. As Kirsten said, to be able to turn the we called them the cove lights, at least in McLaughlin, to turn the cove lights down and have the stars come up. And like Kirsten said, every time that happened, it was a buzz. So it's that stayed with me, and I'd like us to be able to restore that back to Toronto.
All right. Well, with that, Kirsten, do you want to lead things off with the presentations, and then we'll take it from there? You guys can go consecutively, and we'll hear all three of your presentations.
Great. Yes, I am going to, despite how many years, going to attempt to show my Zoom screen and my presentation, because if you worked in a planetarium, of course you have slides. So let me start off. Whoops. There we go. Okay. I'm doing something that I always do, which is looking into the history of things. I really enjoy where things came from. And so what I decided to talk about tonight was sort of the origins of planetariums. They are a fairly unique thing, unique in time and space. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about why I think they exist, how they came about, how they spread across North America, and how they are a unique medium to produce content for. So you saw a little sneak preview of somewhere I was visiting this summer. I had the great fortune to visit Newgrange in Ireland. It's a site that's about 5,000 years old, and it has a lot of really interesting features. This stone is thought to be a depiction of moon phases carved into the rock. You can maybe see them there. The archaeologist that gave us the tour wasn't very definitive about this, but I look at it and I go, yeah, that looks pretty obvious to me. So we look back, humans have got, as Ryan said, that intense connection to the sky. And if we look at megalithic sites like this, you can see that humans were trying to create or recreate the sky down on Earth. A more perhaps familiar example is this one, the Farnese Atlas. This is from about 150 Common Era, 150 AD, as they used to say. And it's a statue, and you can see the ball on Atlas's back. He's carrying the sky and the depictions of the constellations on a celestial sphere. So that's something that is fairly sort of easy to recognize. Other depictions of the sky or our position on Earth looking up, maybe not quite as easy to connect. This one is in Wanaskiwin in Saskatchewan. The little stones that you see arranged on the ground are part of something called a medicine wheel, which in this case was depicting the cardinal directions, you know, the symbol for Indigenous people, the quartered circle. A medicine wheel is basically a version of that. Some of them are thought to perhaps have more technical astronomical alignments. Probably not this one. The reason I included it is just because I've visited it and it's really cool. So I'm going to make you look at my slide of it. Astronomical or earthly depictions of astronomical things got a little more sophisticated when things like gears came about, so machinery. This thing, which you may have had a simple version of back in your elementary classroom, is called an orrery. And if you wonder why, it's actually named after someone whose last name was Orrery. In fact, I believe it was the 4th Earl of Orrery, Robert Boyle, who first created one of these things. His was a little bit more simple. Sorry about that. It was just the Earth and the sun and the moon. But you can see the gears there, and there's a little crank that you would turn, and all these things would move around, and you'd see them orbiting. So it was creating a model of the motion of the planets. So from
Hey,
the
Kirsten,
17th,
it's Daryl. Sorry to interrupt you. I just
no
was wondering
problem.
for the benefit of everybody, could you think you can blow up your screen a bit? Because right now it's on it's not on presenter view or your presenter view. That we can see the images a bit bigger.
Is it on my, can you see my notes on
Yeah,
the
we can
thing?
see your
Yes.
notes. So
Oh
for the benefit,
no,
that's okay. They're really
that's not
interesting
what
to
I meant
read.
to
It
do.
looks great though. It
No,
looks
you don't
great.
want to read my notes. Okay,
There you
hold
go.
on. Well, that's me. Can you see the whole thing now?
I can see you, but now if you
Okay.
go into presenter, if you can go into your presenter view, that might be might
Yeah.
helpful.
And then share that view.
Yeah.
I actually have, hold on. Yes, I'm
Sorry to
trying.
sorry to interrupt there, but I
No,
thought
no,
for
no,
the
no, no.
benefit.
I'm really happy you did. Um, Hold on. Anyway, let me just gab as I do this. I am not able to get any present screen at the moment or share at all because my computer is okay. It's not going.
If you shared your screen again and then just hit
Yeah,
play from beginning, would that work?
that is exactly what you think would happen. But my I am not, share screen is not working for me. So
No worries.
I'm having fun. No, I can't even get it. I'm really sorry, folks. I think, oh, here we go. Let me try that. Doop. Do you see something now?
It's
What
coming.
do you
Yes.
see?
Yes. Yes.
Woohoo!
We
Wonderful.
see a balloon.
Okay, it did
Beautiful.
it. It did it. Great. Okay, what are you seeing?
We see a balloon basket.
Excellent. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay,
Well, and we'll
very good.
edit this out in YouTube. And sorry to the 23-year-old.
Sorry for people who are live. I just haven't used Zoom for 20 years already. Anyway, okay. So now that it's bigger, can you see the gears and you can see the crank on the orrery? Okay,
Absolutely.
great. So take this, and just to note, this is 1700s. So of course the sun was at the center of this thing. And then let's try something that kind of melds the two. So this thing that Richard described cutely as a balloon in a basket is actually something called the Atwood sphere. And if you go to Chicago, you can visit it. It was created in the early 1900s. And it's actually a big metal ball with holes poked in it to depict the positions of the stars. And that basket, you go up into it in a darkened space and the light comes through and you see the celestial sphere around you. To get the planets, they actually have planet paths that they have plugs for that they'll open to show where the planets are. So it's kind of an amazing, a little amazing device. Now, the planetarium that we know, the projector, came around, started to be talked about at about the same time that this thing was built, was in Germany. And now I cannot advance my slides just for fun. Here we go. This is the very first Zeiss planetarium projector, and it was installed in a dome at the Deutsches Museum in Munich, Germany. And what you see, that spiky ball at the top, is the star projectors. That's where the stars came out. Underneath all of those, there were little plates that had holes drilled in them, and a bright light inside would shine out through the holes and be focused onto the dome from those plates. The schematics on the left were part of the patent application, and the person who applied for that patent is this gentleman here. It's an engineer named Walter Bauersfeld. And he actually was working with an astronomer in the early 1900s, sort of thinking, we could actually make a celestial sphere as a projection on a dome. So Bowersfeld is known as having created this thing, but he's actually probably more famous for creating the first sort of built geodesic dome. Which actually is pretty cool when you look at it. This is what it looks like. Very much like the Ontario Place Cinesphere, same idea. And this became the shell of the first sort of permanent planetarium dome installation. I believe it's the one in Jena. Now, actually, a dome is sort of an interesting thing because later on we'll find out that producing content for a domed environment is actually a little bit complicated. So let me get into the planetarium projector a little more in a little more detail. The one I'm going to show you now is actually the very first one that I ever worked on. It's not a photograph of it, but it is a photograph of the same kind. It's a Zeiss Kleine Planetarium 1, a ZKP1, and it was the one that was actually at the Ontario Science Centre when I started working in planetariums. I was very lucky to get a job there and work with this particular projector. So what you see is the ball at the top and all those little eyes in the ball. Underneath those, there is a lens and a plate of metal with holes drilled in it in the precise locations of the stars. And underneath the little eyes, there's a little like eyelid at the bottom, which is actually a weight. And when you move this thing, that weight it stays level basically. And you have a shutter that will cut off the light to match the horizon of the dome. So those are called gravity shutters. So that's kind of a complex description, but it's a very simple idea. You also have the planets. On the original planetarium projector, it actually had gears to move the planets. That was the thing that was kind of exciting about it. They discovered with this one, you really didn't need that, and you could actually just have the planets sit in a little clip, and then you would hand rotate them to where they were going to be that night. And for the moon, there was one that had a little knob that you could turn and the moon would phase. So every time you went in here, you had to actually set up the planets and the moon and position them where they were going to be in the sky. And funny story, the bottom of those tubes, eventually they would wear out. Ours at the Science Center wore out, and I got onto a users group in the early days of the internet, and I connected with a guy in Australia who said, "Oh yeah, we had that problem. We just put a beer cap underneath it to tighten up the connection." I didn't think that was going to fly at the Science Center. And then there were sort of ancillary projectors on here. The one that I'm pointing out with the little green arrow is actually a Milky Way. So if you look, you can see the film of the Milky Way there, and the light would shine out and put the diaphanous Milky Way up on the dome. So basic anatomy of a simple planetarium projector. So born in Germany, came across the Atlantic in 1930. This is the Adler Planetarium, still exists if you go to Chicago. And the people who are standing out in front of it as it's being built, the guy with the beard is Oscar von Müller, who was the director of the Deutsches Museum. And standing to his right is a lady wearing a fur coat. That's his wife. The guy in the middle, the white, lighter hair, is actually Max Adler, and he made his money at Sears Roebuck. His brother-in-law is standing next to him. I think that's his brother-in-law, who actually built the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which is probably where the planetarium would have actually been more suited. It makes me wonder what Max Adler thought of his brother-in-law. And he said, I'm going to have the planetarium for myself. Anyway, in this planetarium was a Zeiss Mark II projector that could show up to about 8,000 stars. And there were Zeiss Mark IIs that opened up a little bit after this in, sorry, I'm going between two screens here. The Hayden Planetarium in New York, the original one, the Fels Planetarium in Philadelphia, the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, and then also the Buell Planetarium in Pittsburgh that I don't have a picture of. I always like to show at around the same time in a little place in California near San Jose, this planetarium opened with its own star projector. It's called the Rosicrucian Museum Planetarium. And just to say, it isn't around anymore. But if you're ever in San Jose looking for something to do, if you try to find the Rosicrucian Museum, driving through a little suburb of Northern California suburb, it looks like the Brady Bunch land, and you come across this area that is basically a bunch of Egyptian temples. It is a trip and definitely worth going to. Unfortunately, that planetarium isn't around anymore. Those Zeiss Mark IIs, after they were sort of done in these planetariums and got replaced, actually traveled around to different spots. The Griffith Mark II ended up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the Adler one actually got lost for a while. It was supposed to go down to Jacksonville, Mississippi, or sorry, Jackson, Mississippi, and then it got kind of buried in a warehouse. And I think they just recovered it recently. So kind of interesting, these old things hanging around. Toronto had a planetarium around that time. It was a little mini one that you could cart around. It was called the Peerless Planetarium. And I think this is from the 1940s or early 50s. And there's a really interesting website about it that the RASC, the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, has. It's rasc.ca/peerless-planetarium. You might want to read about it. It's kind of a cool thing. But other ones got built, and I always have to talk about this one, which is where I worked for 6 years in San Francisco. This was a planetarium that was built in the 50s when Zeiss was no longer building planetariums. You can imagine post-World War II, Zeiss, the optical shops had more important things to make, like glasses and stuff like that. So when San Francisco said, well, we'd like to have a planetarium, there wasn't one around to buy. So they ended up repurposing the naval optical shop that had existed at the museum, the California Academy of Sciences, and just designing a planetarium projector. The style is called the Academy projector after the museum it was from, and it was actually known to be a little bit more efficient because the planet cages were at the ends, so the weight was concentrated in the middle. It was a little bit easier to move. But what's also interesting about this is it made use of another innovation from the time. From across the bay in Berkeley, they actually used a computer in like 1949, 1950 to calculate where the stars should go. And the stars in this planetarium were a little bit different. They were not holes poked in metal, but in fact, they used corundum grains and placed them on the back of the lens and then aluminized it and then brushed the corundum grains off. And it was the job of Leon Salinave, who's here with all the punch cards, to calculate where the corundum grains would go. And then this lady, Frances Greeby, would place them using tweezers. And what's amazing is she had to do the whole thing twice because they discovered an error in the calculations. So she had to sweep them all off and do them again. But what happened is the stars weren't perfectly round, so they looked a little more realistic. And it was very cool until the aluminum started chipping off and you got extra stars and stuff. Anyway, that planetarium was a great place to be. It was a really interesting place to work. And unfortunately, the projector has been decommissioned now, but it was a great spot. Now, thinking about that, when the planetarium came across the Atlantic, things happened. The planetarium directors of the time in the United States decided that the European style of planetarium show, which was, as one person described, a scholarly presentation delivered by the Herr Professor, did not go down all that well with US audiences. There's another director, Joseph Chamberlain, who was the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York at one point, described shows as projector worship. So they'd talk all about the projector and how it worked and how wonderful it was. And he said that no doubt the experience was impressive, but he questioned whether anybody left the shows having learned anything except the fact that the projector was impressive. There was an argument that US audiences did not appreciate the formal style, so American planetariums evolved away from what they called stuffy culture. So it's interesting because they started incorporating film and fictional elements of scripts, and some of them liked that and some of them didn't. And it was actually interesting to read in the literature that way back then they were having what Neil deGrasse Tyson would eventually call the mini-wheats debate, which is whether something was, it was better to create a show that was fun or good for you, right? Fun to eat, good for you, that kind of thing. So even back then, they were having that debate. And I actually picked up on that personally and did some research about the complexities of planetarium shows and how they evolved over the years. So the dome, a very different kind of thing to do programming for. Sorry, again, I'm trying to advance my slide. Here we go. This is actually a picture of the planetarium in Winnipeg, just to show you that they were quite a different medium. And even writing scripts for planetarium shows was different. I heard a Canadian documentary script writer called Richard Lavoie, who's in Montreal, describe trying to adapt writing documentaries for television to a dome. And he said people that wrote for movie and television were used to imagining a single focal point, which is the screen, and the action unfolds in successive elements or beats, and meaning is created by the relationship of images, sound, music, narration, and other voices. And he noted that the planetarium was completely different as a medium, being that there is no single screen. The narrative space explodes, I love that, and surrounds the audience and becomes omnidirectional, especially in 360-degree theaters, the traditional kind. And accordingly, the grammar is different. Meaning emerges not only in the succession of narrative units in the timeline, but also in their relationship in space. The planetarium, in other words, creates environments. And to actually create meaning in that environment is a challenge. One of the ways they did it was to use artwork like this. This is a Chesley Bonestell from 1957, depicting the Earth rise from the moon long before Apollo went. And if you had a painting like this that was sort of long, you could photograph it and chop it up into sections and then project it onto the dome as a panoramic slide, basically around the base of the dome. Later on, with wide-angle lenses, you could create slides that you could put in and project over the entire dome. Those were all sky slides. I spent a lot of time trying to get those to work back in the day. And then, of course, there were also special effects projectors. So if you wanted to show a comet or an asteroid or aurora, this special effects projector source book is freely available online, and it's really neat. I love looking through it because I know a lot of the people who contributed to it, and it's really fun to look back at what we used to have to do to make things work. For example, if you want to show an aurora, you have basically a film strip projector. That's the white box producing light coming out, and then you have a little motor, and attached to the motor is a plexiglass wheel that has been melted. It's called a ripple wheel. And as it spins and the light goes through it, you get a rippling effect on the dome. I have a video of that, but I think I'm not going to show it because of the delay we had. And I'll tell you instead that you can find it on a website and a YouTube channel called Liquid Light. It's really neat. He does these weird light shows, but he's actually demonstrates a lot of these old planetarium projectors, and they're quite a lot of fun. And then there he is, Liquid Light Lab. And you can see he's got this melted piece of plexi and goes up in front of the projector and produces these weird effects on the dome. Lots of other kinds of effects as well. And then one final element for planetarium shows that has always been there is the audio environment. If you've ever been in a dome, one of the things you know is that sound travels around it really, really well. And you have to actually create the audio environment with that in mind. And back in the early days, a lot of classical music was used in planetarium shows, and I'm not sure how well that would have worked. But it turns out that it's not a very good image. But anyway, it turns out that the best kind of music for the dome tends to be kind of high-pitched, high treble, tinkly stuff. They used to call it HTS music, which stood for high tinkly S shit. Anyway, um, it works really well. It sounds good in the environment when it reflects around the dome. It works well. And there were a few composers who were really well known for creating this. One of them was Mark Peterson, who ran a music group called Geodesium. He's actually Carolyn Collins Peterson's partner. And they ran Loch Ness Productions for a long time, but he produced a lot of planetarium music. John Seri produced planetarium music, and Tomita, who is a famous Japanese composer, would produce a lot of this stuff. In Toronto, that first planetarium experience I had was probably set to music by Michael Dana, who went on to become a very famous film music composer. And this set of music, Sirens, is one that I would actually listen to, and I do listen to when I'm writing about space because it brings that back to me so much. And I would play it for you, except that I think YouTube would probably quarantine this video if I do. So I'm going to encourage you to go and look it up. It's on YouTube. You can listen to it there. And Visions of Bernadette is the one that I really, really like. So that is my walk through the history of planetariums. And now, given that I'm at McLaughlin, I figured it would be a good time to turn proceedings over to Richard, who will talk more about that particular dome.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to get myself all set up for doing my own screen sharing here. So I apologize to take one moment to do that. And by the way, I like to listen to one of our composers' music as well. I'll talk later on about a guy named Tim Clark, and one of his songs is one that I play when I'm trying to write something as well. So, Kirsten, I write along there with you. So hopefully the share is coming up. The local folks should be able to see it. Good. So what I want to do is talk about the McLaughlin Planetarium a bit. I want to give some perspectives based on my experiences there. In the 1970s and late 70s, early 80s, I was an operator lecturer at the planetarium. I was also heavily involved in the RISC around that time. I was running the public education programs there at about that time as well. So I really got to know the McLaughlin Planetarium pretty thoroughly. What I'd like to do is give you a brief tour of the place and show you around a bit. I'd also like to show you some of the material that from the early days, from the early mid-60s, that shows what could have been, what some of the original designs look like, and then what happened to it in the 90s. Excuse me. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the people who worked there. Kirsten mentioned Michael Downa, who I've had the privilege of talking to a number of times over the years. And Tim Clark is another one that I'll talk about in a bit. Now, the planetarium itself was a gift from Colonel Robert Samuel McLaughlin. He was involved in GM at the time. He gave $2,250,000 for the building and an additional $1 million for program development. So it was well funded and intended to be funded to continue for a while. The architecture was designed by a company called, our partnership called Hallward, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Goenlock Consulting Architects. The style is very obviously a modernist style. It's not brutalist, but it's getting close. And both together and separately, those two architects designed a number of buildings in Toronto. In addition to the planetarium, they also designed a number of schools, like Sir Wilfrid Laurier and Cedarbrae Collegiate Institute. I think he might have also done Stephen Leacock as well. Now, I should point out that the rest of this presentation, everything I'm going to show, is from what we call the Tom Clark Fonds. Tom was the last director of the planetarium, and he had a pretty good collection of material. Not complete, unfortunately, but a really good collection of photographs and written material. And it's in the archives at the RASC headquarters. And a couple of years ago, Kirsten and I did a photo blitz. And this session seemed like a really good opportunity to share some of that. We only got through half of it, so there's still an opportunity for Kirsten and I to go back and get more. And perhaps that'll become the basis of another presentation. As Kirsten mentioned, the heart of any planetarium is the now I'm having trouble getting a screenshot. There it goes. Heart of any planetarium is the star projector. The McLaughlin Planetarium was made by the then East German company called Zeiss Jena. Jena is the city that it's located in. They're still there today, and they're the hub for all Zeiss optics. It was unusual at that particular time to get an East German planetarium projector, but that's where they were able to go with. There are, in our projector, Kirsten showed one earlier that had one bulb or one globe. This projector had two to cover the northern and the southern hemisphere, along with a whole set of ancillary projectors on it. Now, it was completely manual, at least in my day, and it appeared that way on the last day of the building was open when I went for a visit. Everything was manual, so we had to position everything, like the stars, the planets, exactly correctly throughout the show. Now, Kirsten mentioned scenarios where they could display something, and then what they found was, well, to show the sky for that night, they could just turn some knobs, maybe equipped with beer bottle caps, to be able to position the planets for that night. These projectors were sophisticated enough that they actually could show the sky at any given point in time. And so we could go and find specific dates and align the planets to show what the sky would look like on that particular date. And so we operators had to keep track of what date we were aligning the planets with. And it was especially important during the Christmas show when the planets had to be just so in order to form one of the explanations for the bright star in the east. So it was a bit of a challenge, but it was also made the job interesting and more fun. Now, this is a model of the Zeiss projector at the archives in the RASC, and I am grateful for them to give us access to this stuff. The model shows the two projectors and some of the detail within the cage work. The projector was 13 feet long, apparently weighed 3 tons. There were a lot of small projectors inside. I'll talk about those in a sec. Those 2 globes, those contained, as Kirsten described, the gravity-powered shutters. Each one had sometimes some even has some color filters to give a bit of color to the stars, or were red or blue. And we talked a little bit about the shutters. The small wheels at the very top contained the constellations. Those could be swapped, although during my time, I don't think we actually swapped those out for a different set of constellations. I will tell one story of a show that I did where about 5 or 10 minutes into the show, the North Globe bulb blew. And so we lost all the stars in that particular part of the sky. I figured, we're early into the show, got to have it. So I made the executive decision to stop the show, pull out a spare bulb from the storeroom, get the special ladder we had for crawling up onto the pedestal around the dome. And while I am talking to the audience who are sitting there expecting a star show, I went through the whole process of swapping out the bulb. And then got down, took the ladder away, did the whole bit, restarted the show, and off we went. So it was kind of I think it was an interesting experience for the audience, who probably didn't expect to see that, and certainly was an interesting experience for me because I didn't expect it at all. Kirsten talked about the projectors on the inside a little bit for the planetariums being fixed. In this particular case, they were controlled by an analog computer, which was a set of gears. They could actually replicate things like retrograde motion. Each planet had a plate. Each planet had a star, had 2 projectors on it, and they could again be set to a specific date. Very complex gearing in there, and they were also not only were they complex in controlling the motion of the plate, but they were also tilted at various angles to respect the angle of the planet's orbit off the ecliptic. Now, as well as the planetarium dome and the theater, there were also exhibit halls with some interactive displays. And so we see some of them here showing the planets. Another one here, which again shows some interaction with them. The target audience for this was families and school groups. And so the place was pretty busy during the day with school groups coming in. I did a ton of school shows while I was there, and always fun to work with the kids who are often pretty unruly, but they all got hyper excited about being on an outing. But once the place darkened, the stars came out, we kind of had their attention. We also did public shows sort of around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then again at 7 o'clock at night. We would do shows targeted to the public with a little more upscale, if you will, more mature content. This shot here is that not only did we have school groups and families, we had astronauts. And so we had a visit from Jim Lovell. I had not been able to confirm the timing for this as to when it occurred, but it says 1970. That was the same year as Apollo 13. So I'm not sure he would have been out and about too much, especially before the flight. But it is kind of cool that he made a visit to the planetarium. The chap on the left is Tom Clark, who became the director of the planetarium later on, and was my boss, I guess, for while I was there. This particular picture shows some of the original plans, and here I want to show a couple of shots of what could have been. This is not what was built. This was what was proposed. And so what I'm going to show is a series of cuts, if you will, and curtailments that occurred during the planetarium construction that pulled it back to kind of a minimum state. And we'll talk about that leading up to the 1995-96 decisions to close it down. What could have been was 1965. This was one of the original plans. Here it shows the importance of exhibit space. So not only do you have an entranceway at the lower level, entrance level, then a display level above that, but to the right, there's another rectangular building, which has 2 additional levels of displays, as well as the level going into the theater. Above that is office spaces. And then there are workshops, just because a lot of stuff is handcrafted, especially back in those days, as Kirsten mentioned, with some of the really cool little projectors that people made. So all of that was contained, as you can see, a lot of display space and a lot of exhibit space, as well as meeting spaces and so on. Back in the day, there was proposals for a connection to the subway as well. There was also talk of mounting the Zeiss on a retractable column. And you can see the column that the Zeiss is sitting on in the middle of the image. that column goes all the way down to the bottom. And so that was the intention was that we could drop that down and then use the space for theaters or for theater work or for other events type of thing. That never happened, nor did the building on the right, at least not in its entirety. Some of it did, but not all of it. This is an overhead view of the from about the same time. You can see, I'm going to try to, I'm not sure you can see my mouse, but the planetarium is in the middle here. This is looking down. And this building here was intended to be built to house that display space, the office spaces, and so on. What was built was a little bit different. And if you're looking at the, if you know the University of Toronto location, this is the Royal Ontario Museum here. It's kind of an H shape through here. The Faculty of Music is back here, Faculty of Law, and Falconer Hall, all of this being slated for some kind of redevelopment at some point in time. Lots of controversy around that. Okay, so what we ended up with towards the end was this view of the building, which was we had the planetarium in the middle, the dome, and the stairs between the display level and the planetarium and the exhibits. Oops, gone one too far. Just want to go back. Do it this way. Okay. Which contained this building here, which contained stairs and exhibits. And there was intention here to put parking. You can see in small letters, it says future parking. I can attest from bitter experience that never happened because I would often end up parking all over the place to try to get to work. Ended up eventually riding a bicycle about 15 miles in the morning just to get there, 15 kilometers, because it was just easier than trying to find parking. This was another view of the blueprints of the building. Again, this is a little bit tougher to see, but it does show the dome, the exhibit and stair area, and then the intention was to have a 500 seat theater. I keep touching the button, which is not helping. A 500 person theater, which was intended to be showing along with that future parking. But again, this was never constructed. There was eventually a theater in the basement of the planetarium. It didn't hold 500 folks, though. And we held a lot of university, U of T astronomy department sessions were held there, as well as every second or third Friday night was an RASC meeting. And this was the side view of that building, with which was intended to have the theater and the workshops and the offices. And part of the only reason I show this is I want the eagle-eyed folks in this session to look across the bottom, and I hope you see the Jag that is parked on the bottom. So I thought somebody on that crew who were doing these drawings must have owned a Jaguar E-Type. Quite a beautiful car at that particular time. So this was what was built by 1980. This was what we had was the middle of the H of the ROM was filled in with offices. That meant that there was no new gallery space in that new wing, at least very little. But they turned more of the old building into galleries, which was terrific for the museum. But the public connection that was between the museum and the planetarium, well, that got turned into a staff entrance. And the entranceway into the planetarium that was before on that right-hand side, if you will, of the diagrams I've been showing you up until now, well, that was gone. That was completely filled in by this new office block filling in the H of the ROM. So what we ended up with by the time we got done was the dome and one floor of sort of half offices and half basically waiting space and another piece that was half workshops. So all the workshop space got condensed into this one space. There were a couple of offices in the basement still. So it was greatly reduced in size and scale. And when you look at what was originally planned in the 1960s, how much of an environment it provided for meeting spaces, for displays and exhibits, and for for the community to meet in this space, all of that was gone. And we were just left with this, which kind of explains why the place was closed. But also it illustrates what we need in a planetarium. It isn't just a dome. It also has to be places for meeting space, places for exhibits, places for teaching, places for showing young minds what can happen in space, and illustrate to them the different career opportunities and different sciences that they can get into. Certainly, it was influential on me. So let's talk about the dome for a second. The dome was 75 feet across. It was built in 2 layers. The outer layer is concrete. I'm looking forward to when they want to try to tear that down. The inner dome is white, painted, perforated aluminum. At the bottom, there's a gap between the two of about 6 feet. Towards the top of it, it's about 4 feet. I can say from experience, it feels like a lot less when you're actually up there. There were at the time 4 JBL theater speakers that produced absolutely terrific sound. I helped install those. And the perforations in the dome allowed the sounds to enter the dome as well as providing for air circulation. They did not interfere with the display of the stars, which I thought was always pretty cool how that was the case. The dome air is heavily filtered because you don't want any dust reflecting the beams of light from the projectors. And at the beginning, at the time of opening, there were 361 seats. 6 seats were taken out for the installation of a laser projector for shows I'll talk about next. And I will point out there's a little hatch that is right here. You might notice it on the parapet. There's a bit of equipment on there as well, but there's a little tiny hatch. And that little tiny hatch opened out into the utility room for the Zeiss projector. It was racks and racks of relays and power management. And I went in there once a year, and that was to come out of the hatch onto the parapet to watch the Santa Claus parade. It was about the best place in Toronto to watch it from. So that's the building itself. I want to talk a little bit next about some of the shows that were presented there. The New Worlds show was the first one that I was involved in. Had a lot to learn very quickly. It covered it off. It talked about Viking, which had just launched 1975. Voyager also just launched. Who knew they would still be going? Every year we did a Christmas show. It's essentially the same show every year, but various interpretations of the Star of Bethlehem. We also got to do a show around the time of the King Tut exhibit came to the ROM. Actually got Omar Sharif to narrate for that. But the guys, the producer and the recording engineer, had to go to Paris and meet Sharif in his hotel room in order to get that recording. There was a lot of discussion about their expenses when they came back. The brochures here, they were meant for the tourist stands and hotels and that kind of stuff. And they're from those particular shows, they're all I've been able to find. I haven't been able to find scripts or artwork. If anybody has that stuff, I'd love to see it, at least to photograph it for the archives. But so far, going through the RISC archives, going through the ROM archives, no sign of those things yet. The musicians have got most of their music, and that's been helpful. I mentioned the laser show. This came in the 70s, well into the 80s, and the idea of this was to use the dome to put laser light displays onto the dome against music that was well-known and popular types of music. But what the laser artist would do, and there was a guy called the laser artist who could manipulate the controls of this projector to be able to show different types of geometrics, and also Kirsten referred to them as sort of the fuzzy images for things like Borealis or Aurora and stuff like that. And basically what a lot of those was, they fessed up to me on those things. They went around to the hardware stores and got different examples of frosted glass for showers, for shower doors. And then they would cut them into little round things and project the images through those little pieces of plastic. And so it was really quite in some ways very simple, but other ways the computer controls for running these things was actually quite complicated. And so the first tech who came in when I was there was a guy named Steve Asbill, and he was a guy, he could strip a 4-color argon laser between shows down to the basic parts to do a repair and get it going. And at the same time, in the show, manage the artistry of the show. But the McLaughlin Planetarium, these shows were a moneymaker. We ran them after the times when the public would be there. So the star shows for the public, where you could bring your kids and that kind of stuff, they were done by 8 o'clock. So we could run 2 laser shows after that and still close the building before 11 o'clock. So for the hourly cost of 3 ushers, 1 ticket person, the house manager, and me, probably less than $100 a day, they could fill the place on a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. And they were a lot of fun because it was a pretty rambunctious crowd that came into these things. As well as the original Laserium 2, and Laser Rock. There were also Laser Genesis, against the music of the band Genesis, as well as Laser Zeppelin and a bunch of other variations as well. This music here, this one here was called Heavy Water. Heavy Water was different. It wasn't laser based. It was based on using basically projector technology and using colored gels and oils and kind of moving the plates around that these things were on in order to produce a number of effects. The audience wore 3D glasses just to further intensify the effect. I think if you were, I'm going to put it in quotes, if you were properly prepared for one of these shows, then I'm sure it was quite a show. But to the stone cold sober theater operator like me, I didn't always relate to it. Although I personally like the music that Tim Clark did. Two of the songs are on the Space Place Canada music download card that you can get for a small donation. And Kit Kirsten, these are some of the songs I listen to for when I'm trying to get work done. Nice and fast paced and even. This was the original information for visitors guide for the planetarium. It's multiple pages. I'm going to do some overlays on top of this. This was the original, on the right-hand side was the original map or blueprint of the building. The second layer up, the second floor up was where the exhibits were, and then there was, and the dome was right above that. Then you had the Hall of the Stars and the stairs to the theaters of the stars and further, where there were further displays. When they did the renovation in 1997 to take down the Hall of Stars and replace that with the office building to fill in the H, and we lost that. And actually, just wanted to show the elevations here: main entrance, the planetarium exhibit area, the Theater of the Stars, and the corridor to the museum. Well, that all that stuff from the gallery here. I'm sorry to make you turn your head. All this stuff here, that stuff all disappeared during the renovation in the 1970s. And so what we ended up with, we went from this kind of a blueprint to this being the only blueprint, where we have the second floor contains some office space, contain the workshops that the team used for producing the shows, and the assembly waiting area, which I must admit was kind of drab. It was kind of like a bus station waiting for where you waited for the show. There was very little on exhibit. So in my opinion, these renovations kind of set up the planetarium for failure over time at the end. So back to the Zeiss projector for a second. The Zeiss projector was projector for the stars, and that's what it showed: stars, constellations, and the Milky Way. Fabulous. What it did was, what we needed to have though were landscapes and other images that showed up. And so you see and Kirsten talked about this, when you're doing an image for the dome versus an image for a screen, they're quite different. And so you had to have somebody who had their mindset in place to be able to draw this kind of artwork to produce, in this case, what looked like Monument Valley and the mittens on the monument on the right-hand side. But it could have been the moon, it could have been Mars in this case. And there were lots of different landscapes that are shown, and it could transition from not only from a planetary extraterrestrial landscape like this to the inside of Leonardo da Vinci's studio to the surface of an asteroid. And all of this was accomplished by a couple of very, 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 very smart people, very, very talented people, one of which was Bill Ireland. Bill was a lovely fellow. I spent a bit of time with him while I was there, and he did a lot of work and again had to deal with those perspectives of images moving across the dome. Additionally, there were the music guys. This was on the left-hand side is Tim Clark. Tim is, last I heard of Tim about 2 years ago, he was doing artisanal bread making in Asheville, North Carolina, and having a wonderful life. Michael Dana, as Kirsten mentioned, is now in Los Angeles. I approached him to get recordings of the music that he had done in his planetarium time. It took him a while, but he got back to me and said, I found the tapes. And then he said, I haven't got a machine that'll play the tapes. And so then it becomes another few weeks. He comes back and says, I found the machine on eBay. So we got the machine. And then there were some technical issues around the fact that you don't play old tapes as they are. You have to bake them in order to reset the backing and the oxide bonding to that backing. So quite a lot of work that he went through. He deserves, in my mind, another Oscar for all that work to get us the music. Another one was Kevin Staples, who was together with Carol Pope, formed the band Rough Trade. He recently passed away, unfortunately. There's Tim Clement. All of them, like I said, are all featured on the music download card. This bunch, and I love this photo, it makes me laugh. This looks like the cover of a Queen of the Queen 2 album, because the way the lighting is set up. But these four guys were the technicians who ran the place through the 70s well into the 80s, and were still around in the 90s when the place was starting to decline. On the left, Carlos Gomez, he was one of the general technicians. Fred Jessup was the boss, the guy in the middle. He knew everything about computers because they were using a DEC PDP-10 to manage the machines and the coordination between the music and the audio and what the various projectors did. Luther Kravitz in the back, he looked after the Zeiss projector and was a master machinist. And Joe Malario was the junior guy, and it was also a show operator as well. And this is just a quick one of these guys at work. There's an old DEC computer back from the mid-70s. Carlos working on the projectors, and that was the later workshop the guys had. And lastly, all these shows get written by people, and they had to be pulled together. They don't just appear. So these guys, Ian McClellan is the guy on the phone. Ian McGregor he's a good friend of mine. Ian McGregor is the guy on the phone. Not sure who the guy in the middle is. And John Kenny is the guy on the featured in a newspaper article there. These guys wrote the shows. They pulled them all together. Worked with Bill. Worked with the composer at the time to get the artwork and the music right. And then they had to train us, the operators, and they would give us a set of 15, 20 index cards that contain the instructions and the timing for the show. And heaven help you if you lost your copy. So it was very important to keep that. And these guys were really important to the show. This was the last slide I have very quickly. It was a cartoon done by Bill. Had to probably zoom in on it to really see it. But the idea was to show what goes on inside the planetarium, all those little projectors around the outside that Fred Jessup pulls together. The connections to the dome on the inside, and of course the projector with a CCM logo on it. So beautiful, a nice little piece of work by Bill. Anyway, that's it from me. Thank you very much for hearing the story of the planetarium, McLaughlin Planetarium. I feel like I was representing the ghost of planetariums past. If you want to find out more information, we did do a nanos poll on the importance of a planetarium to the community. You can find that at the first link. If you'd like to become a member, which Daryl talked about earlier, you can find that also on our website. And there is a direct link to it here as well. And as I mentioned earlier, all the material that I went through is all from the Tom Clark fonts, which is held by the Archives of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. And with that, thank you very much. I will stop sharing and pass it over to Ryan, who's going to tell us all about what planetariums are doing today in his world and some of the technology that's coming along.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to give a second for the spotlight to change. And look at that. They're right on it. I love this. I really enjoyed hearing both Kirsten and Richard's talks for different reasons. Kirsten, I've been to a lot of the places that you mentioned in the history of planetariums, including Jena in Germany, which was where the International Planetarium Society meeting was held in 2024 as a celebration, part of the celebration of 100 years of the planetarium. Now, interestingly enough, that celebration is still ongoing for the next few months. It's technically ending in May 2025, but for any of us in the planetarium world, we're always celebrating the amazing things. But just a quick note from that conference, we actually got to see the original Zeiss projector in a small dome that they had set up there. They brought it up from a museum in Munich, and that was just such a fascinating experience. For those of us in the planetarium world, certainly, but I think anybody would have enjoyed the very campy kind of old school look of what a planetarium used to be. And Richard, I really resonated when you talked about doing the bulb, having to change the bulb live in a show. We have a modern version of that, and it's called Sometimes the Software Crashes. And when that happens, we do the same thing. We get to explain what is really happening. And luckily that happens a lot less these days, but it's always fun to just roll with the punches and talk to audiences about it. At any rate, I'm going to talk about some of the new things that are happening in the world of planetariums. A little bit less about what I do with portable inflatable domes and traveling domes, although that is an important part of modern planetariums. But I'm going to talk about the big tech that's going on and what larger planetariums, like the one that we at Space Place Canada are hoping to build, will be able to do. And so I'm going to fascinate you with some of the things that we can do these days. So the current future power planetariums, I'm just going to dive into all these things that a planetarium can do. It's less of a star theater than a historical planetarium, which was there to show the stars. The modern ones can actually do several things very well, including being a star theater. And some of those things, I've got a laundry list here that you can see that I'm going to talk about one at a time. And I promise this is the wordiest slide you will see from me. Everything else is more visual, because you can imagine I'm a bit of a visual person. One of the things I love very much is, growing up, I went to a lot of concerts, and I still do every so often, but I love the idea of live music in a planetarium. And one of the best domes that I've ever seen used in live music is the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, where they will put live bands in there, and there's certainly challenges with the acoustics, but you can accompany this great musical act for fans of that music or fans of music in general. You can accompany it with these beautiful images on the sky that can be space images or can be abstract artistic images. For anybody that has been to a concert in the last 20 years, 30 years, they've always been a bit of a visual spectacle as well as this auditory experience with music. And so it's natural, I think, for a full dome theater, a large theater that can display pretty much anything, to be able to do something like this and showcase local artists, international artists, and show some beautiful visuals as well. So that's a really popular one nowadays. And that can be everything from, this is a mariachi band, by the way, which I think is really wonderful. It can be everything from a rock concert to a classical production, to theater. There's people even doing theater productions inside planetarium domes. The next one is that it can be a fitness studio. In this case, this is Planetarium Yoga from McDonald Planetarium in St. Louis, Missouri. And as some modern planetariums have, you might notice that there's no actual seats in this theater. There likely are. They would just be modular seats that could be packed up and moved out of the way for some of these different events. And in this case, you can see in the sky, there's maybe one star, but I think the point of it is that they're using those cove lights that Kirsten and Richard had mentioned earlier on. These beautiful rainbow cove displays to signify breath or breathing, or and really work with the person who's leading this experience. Now, yoga is a very calm experience, and I find planetariums to be a very calm place, but there can be some intensity with it too. Another thing modern planetariums are is that they're theaters. Kirsten, you mentioned a really interesting thing earlier on with the Winnipeg Planetarium, that there was no focal point. A lot of full dome films use a focal point within the planetarium and treat it almost like an IMAX experience, a giant screen cinema. And one of my favorite modern productions is this one here. I saw it at Jena, and it was the Stellars from some friends at Creative Planet, a production studio in Europe, who made this entirely animated film for kids. And it's this beautiful full dome production that has not very much to do with astronomy, but a lot to do with the environment and taking care of our world, and kind of pushing the limits of what animation can do in the full dome space and in general. So it's a really great little film, and a great example of just films. You can show entire films and treat a planetarium in many ways as an IMAX theater, on usually a smaller scale, but still very beautiful, very high resolution, very bright, and show these kind of incredible productions. And I'm very excited to continue to talk about laser shows too, because those are something that modern planetariums do. Yes, laser shows are still around, and I was just as surprised as you are, hopefully, to hear that. They've gotten better. I mean, you can do, we talked about Laser Genesis and Richard's billets there, but you can do laser Taylor Swift now. You can do laser anything. And the laser technology has come a long way as well. You can put in smoke machines. My favorite piece of all this is that the laser units are like this big now, and they can actually be rented. So this is, even the industry of laser shows has come a long way in planetariums. And I think there will always be a market for that, because the number of people that I talk to across Ontario that fondly remember McLaughlin, not necessarily for the star shows, but for the laser shows, the experiences that they had there. And that just speaks to how sticky a planetarium experience can be, whether it is the space side, the space theater side, or the laser show side, or, well, any other side that I'm going to explain. And we talked a little bit about academics as well. And this is something that I really value in a planetarium, is the opportunity for scientists, local, international, from anywhere, to be able to talk about their science in the planetarium. And I think, the natural thought is to say, well, how about it should be astronomers, right, who can talk about their latest research. And although I think that's valuable, the dome is a place that you can show any visuals. There's a lot of content in the planetarium world now that deals with traveling into a cell. There's education programs for traveling under the ocean and talking about coral reefs and sustainability in that front. And so academic talks would be very valuable to a number of people in a planetarium. And one of the ones that does it the best, this is from Flandau, I believe, that's Chasley in Liberty Science Center in New Jersey. One of the best is the Fisk Planetarium in Boulder, Colorado. They've got a full stage within their planetarium that stays there all the time. It doesn't affect their modular seating, and it allows them to do everything from live presented shows to these academic talks, and still maintain all the other programs that I've talked about. A modern planetarium can do. And here's a really fun one. You can get married under the stars. I think that's a cute thing. And if we talk about, the sustainability of a cultural center in general, it can often be an issue to keep funding going. It can often be an issue to keep the money flowing in. And, it's not all about the money, obviously, but this is something that can be offered to people that is really valuable. You get married under the stars. And, the same thing will go with corporate events. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But at the end of the day, you can have these incredible experiences. I remember working at the Ontario Science Center, and they had a little mini show that was for proposals, because people would come in wanting to propose in the dome under the stars as well. And there's value to that. People resonate with that. People connect with that. And that's what it's really all about. And I'm going to pull all this together shortly. This is actually a still image from some full dome content that came up recently. And this is much more about the planetarium as a place of science communication and the adaptability of a modern planetarium, because it is a digital theater. This was taken by a colleague of mine, Derek Demeter, in Florida. He actually this is the Artemis II rollout that happened in January. And he took this footage in full dome with his own little camera and narrated it and brought it to his planetarium and shared it with the entire planetarium community for free. And so I was able to take this and put this in my domes, and that allows us to communicate more visually about the Artemis II launch that's coming up. So if you don't know about that, you should definitely learn about it. But this beautiful imagery from somebody who was actually there, you can feel yourself being placed there. You can see these gorgeous images from the new telescopes, James Webb Space Telescope. They're just easy to get, they're easy to adapt, and it can be done very, very quickly as well. And so from a science communication standpoint, being able to bring in these beautiful images that communicate the science to the public about what's actually happening in the world of astronomy and of science right now is valuable, and something that we do even better now than planetariums did historically. So I find that kind of interesting. And then Richard mentioned exhibits. I think exhibits are just an important part of rounding out the experience when you're not in a theater. Nobody has an endless attention span. And although I've spent several 12-hour days inside planetariums, not everybody wants to do that. And so when you have a school program visiting, or you have the public visiting. There's a lot more value to having other interactive exhibits. And that's also speaking to my time at the Science Center, where interactive exhibits are the bread and butter. But they complement each other. The Sky Theater, the planetarium, complements having exhibit space to show more things, to show real things. One of the nice things is that you can just get pieces of meteorite that you can show to people and actually touch these real tangible things. And that creates an experience that's a lot more connective to people that they can then walk away with and remember. So, and this last one, I don't actually have an image for because it is variable. Community engagement is something that's really important in modern planetariums. A planetarium is a place for everybody. I mean, the slogan of Astronomy in Action is space for everyone, because it's a place that everybody should feel welcome. It's a place that everybody can use. And a modern planetarium is a place that you can just go and hang out, whether it's hanging out in exhibits or in a classroom space or just having a relaxing environment to explore in. Planetariums are much more of a community hub nowadays than I think ever before. And then on top of that, you can go and see a theater show. You can go to a gift shop. You can go to see some exhibits. You might see an academic talk. You might do some yoga. All these different things that you can do make a planetarium so much more than the historical space theater that we've talked about up to this point. And this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is the goal, is to, in the 21st century, this is what a planetarium is supposed to be for people. And there are some around the world that do it exceptionally well. I've been lucky to talk to a lot of the people who've worked on these different programs and different ideas. And, every image that I took in this talk came from one of my colleagues. And so it's really wonderful to see what different domes are doing. And we have the ability now in the planetarium community to share those experiences, whether it's at conferences or just through connections. So connecting to the modern network of planetariums around the world, we can stay current and see what is being done and what people are really curious about. I'm going to spend the next few minutes just talking a little bit about the tech side of things, because modern technology in planetariums is much less your ZKP. It's much less your Starball with planet lights etched out in the Milky Way. It's much less spinning a wheel to show the aurora that you've melted yourself. Although some of the early days I still did some of that stuff, so it's not that unfamiliar. But now, although expensive, there are beautiful, gorgeous projectors, 4K, 8K, and then we're starting to get into this other technology, this LED projection technology, and we'll talk about the sphere a little bit if you're thinking of that immediately. But these are the two technologies that are kind of leading in the planetarium field. Still, the number one is the traditional projector. It's visually very beautiful. You can put 8, 10, 12 of them in a theater, blend the images together, and get as high as 16K resolution across the dome. Now, that's obviously not the only factor that makes a good planetarium dome. 16K resolution sounds really nice, and it is really nice. But I don't know. I've seen 12K, I've seen 8K, I've seen 4K, and they all look beautiful to me for different reasons. But you end up with these beautiful, bright, clear pictures that just make you feel that you are immersed in the experience, which is kind of the point, right? And as for the LED walls, those are up and coming. This is, I think, going to be the dominant technology in the planetarium world in the future, because right now it's new, fairly new, a few years old, but it's expensive. It costs a lot to put a lot of LEDs on a massive screen that covers an entire hemisphere. And the greatest example of that is the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is basically a giant LED wall for audiences to go in. And it's not a full dome. Kirsten has actually been there, so she can probably talk about it better than I could. But it does give you the immersive feel by filling your entire peripheral vision. And that's kind of the point of immersive theaters, domes, IMAX, all that stuff, is that it fills your peripheral vision and gives you this feeling of, I am in this space. And they do lots of concerts at the Sphere. That's a great example of things that they do. Kirsten, you can tell me, I don't know if they do actually any planetarium type content there, or if it's more concerts and sporting events, but yeah, more concerts and sporting events, eh? So that's how you reach a big audience. But I don't see any reason why a modern planetarium can't do all of those different things. Maybe not sporting events, but that's a whole other can of worms. So that's the sphere. Incredibly expensive to make something that big, and but it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. If you ever get the chance to visit, I've heard very good things, mostly from Kirsten, but I want to go and check it out myself at some point. One of the planetarium companies that has produced both planetarium content and projection systems and software and everything is now under a group called COSM, COSM. And COSM has also developed these experience centers. This is an LED video wall. We're not actually at Yankee Stadium, as in the image here. It looks almost unreal when you see it at first, but what you're seeing is a group of people sitting at what is essentially a restaurant with a giant 2-story video wall on it, using the COSM version of the LED panel technology. And it's immersive. You are there. You are feeling like you're at the event. I've seen football shown. I've seen European football, soccer shown. I've seen baseball shown. They're really beautiful screens. They're really high resolution. They're very bright. And when it comes to planetariums, this is a real image from the first. Actually, this might be a render. It looks kind of rendery to me, but I guess that's how it looks. This is the planetarium in Prague, also a COSM LED display. And one of the things I love about it for a planetarium is that you can produce this display all the way down to the floor. You can be above the experience and feel more immersed in it without this bright projector shining into your eyes, without this cross reflection that happens with projectors. The contrast is absolutely stunning. I've seen some of the video walls in real life, and they're absolutely beautiful. This is likely the future, or some version of this is likely the future of giant screen cinema. And it's already being installed in theaters around the world. And as the costs continue to come down, I think we'll see it a lot more as well. So that's kind of the newer tech. A question from the chat: how much does an inflatable planetarium cost? Well, there's quite the range, I'll tell you. I'll show you one of mine. I'll show you my largest one, actually. Let's see if I can. Oh, I did move that up here, so it would be a little more visible. This is our biggest planetarium dome. That door doesn't look it, but it's 6.5 feet tall as the doorway. The actual dome itself is about 20 feet tall and about 30 feet wide, and we hold about 30 people in there. A dome like this will run somewhere between 60 and 100,000. Smaller inflatable domes, we have 3 smaller ones. They can be a fair bit less expensive. And by the way, that's just for the dome. That doesn't count the tech inside, which we use a fisheye, a single 4K projector with a fisheye lens. And I'll show you one of my favorite photos of myself giving a program with in the dome. That's one of the days when I had to sit in the middle because I had a keyboard to run everything. Now I have a tablet and I can sit anywhere. But you can see our little fisheye lens and the 4K projector in the center. And this is in the big blue dome that you can see there as well. So it's quite beautiful. They're not cheap. The projection tech is not cheap. The fisheye lenses are not cheap, but it's amazing how much more inexpensive they are than a full fixed planetarium. You know, one of those LED phosphor projectors can run you anywhere from 60, even maybe say 20 to $80,000 that I showed in the slide here. So let me just pop back and I'll show you. This is a Christie Sapphire 4K 40 projector. So Christie's in, I think, Kitchener-Waterloo, so they're not too far from for many of us living here. Thank you for nodding to my colleagues for validating the things I'm saying. Those are quite expensive. They're quite large. They produce a lot of heat. I remember seeing a demonstration of 8 of them running a 12K projection a few years back. And although it was absolutely stunning and gorgeous, it was a sauna inside the theater. So there's some management that has to happen with that. And again, that's another benefit of the LED technology, is that you don't end up with a lot of heat. LEDs don't produce a huge amount of heat. They tend to be a little bit lower power, although laser phosphor projectors are a little bit better these days in terms of the power draw. So there's your Cosm Studio. There's your first planetarium in Prague, and it's amazing the things it can do. These LED walls and where it'll take us. One of the questions that I get asked about a lot, and people always say to me, "Are you worried about virtual reality? Are you worried about VR replacing the planetarium?" Like, this is, you can put on a VR headset these days that is very high resolution, high frame rate, puts you in a place, and you feel like you're actually there. And the things I always say is the same 2 points I always make. I recognize we're almost out of time. I'm going to stop soon. Where the planetarium, first of all, if you wear VR goggles, anywhere from 15% to 75% of people experience some form of nausea after a certain amount of time. You can mitigate that, but I know people who say to me, "I can't do VR headsets at all because I just feel ill. I can't do it." And or they have neck pain or whatever it is. So there's still some problems to work out. I don't know if they will get worked out, but for me, the more important thing is the second point that I'm going to make, and that's that a planetarium is a shared experience. It's a shared experience. It means that when you go to a planetarium with all of your friends in your school class and you see a show and you get to laugh at the same things and be surprised by the same things, you go through the gamut of emotions during a live show. This is my experience I'm speaking of. You connect with that so much more. You remember what your friends were doing at the same time. You share it with them when you leave. You can continue to have that experience over and over and over again as you go out into the world. And everybody in your class is in on it. You don't have to hide that experience. You can share it and talk about it. It's always a point that you can look back on happily with your friends. And that goes for everybody, whether you're an adult with your kids going into a planetarium, or a grandparent with grandkids, or brothers and sisters, any friends, family relation, anybody can go into a planetarium and feel more connected to the people that they're with because you had this stunning, beautiful shared experience, whether that's yoga or music. Daryl's going to shut me off in a sec. I'm almost done, I swear. I just saw you pop up. I could talk forever about the technology and the joy of modern planetariums, but for me, the planetarium is a versatile, it's a Swiss Army knife of things that you can do. There's still tons of value in a space show. There's incredible value in a live presented show, but there's a lot of ways that you can create a valuable experience for anyone, and that's what we try to do. So thank you.
That's great, Ryan. What a I learned so much from all three of you today, and just in terms of like the classic, the flashback and nostalgia, and like the pictures, and to see just how vibrant the planetarium we had before played such an important part in people's lives. And my takeaway, even with what you said just now, Ryan, is that a planetarium is not just about intellect, astronomy. It's cultural. It brings people together. There's an emotional side. There's a musical side. Like Richard, you referenced music numerous times, and it was an event, right? So these things really bring the community together. And it also made me reflect on the fact that we've always looked up to wonder what's up in the sky, what's happening up there. And we go to experts like you to figure that stuff out. But yet now in Toronto, and especially in the GTA, we don't have that opportunity to look up and be together as a community, because there are amazing things happening in space right now, and events that are happening and are about to happen that the world will experience together and look up again. Just as we wrap up, any just thoughts on that in terms of the interest in space and the wonder of space that still exists from even when you talked about, 40, 50 years ago?
Are you talking about when I was around?
Well,
I was going to say, I think that's just the two of us, eh, Richard?
Yeah, and I think you're barely qualified for that one.
Oh.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly right on the alignment of the times. If you go back to when the planetarium was first opened, and the space race was going on, the moon, the race to the moon, through the 60s, through the 70s, there was still a whole bunch of space activities going on with continued moon launches. The space shuttle was coming. There were a bunch of things that said that there was an interest in what was going on with space. We've had a bit of a lapse in that. What's going on at the ISS is kind of almost like a bus ride, even though there's incredible stuff and research happening there. And Artemis is contributing today to regenerate some of that interest and regenerate interest in the industries of doing things with them. And so I think there's a lot of alignment today that says, yeah, we should be doing stuff to facilitate not just, Artemis on TV or watching the launch somewhere, but actually leveraging that to provide education and experiences that people can relate to and build on to do things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, aside from space, there's been a lot of development in astronomical research, discovering extrasolar planets and proof that they are there, getting on the cusp of being able to tell what they are like. I mean, that is fundamental to those questions of, are we alone, which is one of those things that you think about on those dark nights looking up at the sky. And, from my personal experience, the last slide in my deck that I didn't show was my entire family visiting a planetarium. And we went to a whole bunch of places, and it was my kids' favorite thing, even though they were both cynical teenagers. The best thing they saw in the trip was the planetarium. So it's still got the power to excite people. And I don't know, I think, Ryan, you got to some pretty good ideas of why that is, that shared experience and all of that. I think that's really important. Something a television show can't do, or a good film can't do it.
I'll jump in and say that I think a planetarium in the modern day is even better equipped to do all of those things.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't get to talk about was the content side. I have these small domes, and I'm making content on a small computer as opposed to a giant render farm that some studios have. I mean, I had this queued up because I wanted to show some spacey stuff. This is running on my system right now, flying into the Milky Way galaxy and seeing stars. And I can output this to my planetarium domes and show it to all of you in full dome in 4K, 60 frames a second. And it's stunning and it's beautiful. And that's kind of cool that I can do that, because if I can take this really amazing concept that's happening in the world of astronomy right now and create this beautiful imagery to help you understand it, oh, that's a memorable experience right there.
Where would we have a couple questions in the chat? I know for Space Place Canada, all of us working to advocate for a planetarium, try to get one built in Toronto, fundraising, looking for donations, helping us to be able to actually prospect to look for a place for a planetarium, which is the question, hey, where can a modern planetarium be located in a place like Toronto? We're still searching for that location, aren't we?
Yep.
We are, but, if we take lessons from other cities, Japan in particular, there's planetariums on the tops of skyscrapers in, I think, Tokyo, anywhere, shopping malls. You can put them lots of different places, so we can be very innovative.
And I guess,
And although we're looking for a large planetarium, I'll just jump in quickly. Although we're looking to build something quite large, an international scale, beautiful modern planetarium, there are plenty of smaller, what we would consider smaller sized domes that are doing incredible things. And the technology is enabling those smaller domes to do things in the same way as the big traditional domes like Adler or Hayden.
It's like we were talking about earlier during the discussion around the McLaughlin. It isn't just the dome; it's all the spaces around it that facilitates the community and the building up of different communities that are going to exist within the space. That takes more space than just what a dome's going to take. It needs a little more. And to the previous discussions, we can be really innovative in how we look at different places like tops of buildings and middles of shopping centers and parks and other places, and wherever. I think we would all agree, wherever there's good access for public transit, wherever there's good access for school buses to get in, because school trips are still going to happen despite of what people think, and good access for tourism, then have a combination of all those things together. That's probably a good place for us.
That's a good point. I mean, I think that answers that one question too about what do you all hope a planetarium will have. I think, as you said, it could have everything. It could house so many different things for the community and really impact tourism, the economy in so many ways, and education, as you said, science, technology, engineering, math, art, all of those different things. So,
Mhm.
any last thoughts as we wrap up here? We're getting to the bottom of the hour. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but just some final comments, maybe. Just a quick whip around at the top, maybe 20 seconds each, just to close this off, and we'll tie it up with a nice bow, and then I'll have a call to action at the end.
I just want to say that I think that one of the reasons it's important for us to have this now at this time is that we are a very active country in astronomical research and in space exploration. It may be little known that Canada was the third country in space, and we were almost the first thing to touch the surface of the moon on the Apollo lander. Not quite, but almost. And those stories they're not always at the tops of other people's communication cycle. So I think it's important to have a place to tell Canadian stories about space and astronomy, as well as the fact that in Canada we do consider, all of the cultures that are here. It's something that is rather unique about Canada that we can also use our storytelling to bring in people from all around the world. That's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about having a planetarium in Toronto.
Richard?
Yeah. To add to that, I think one of my focuses that you had mentioned in your introduction about me is developing skills in young people. So I do mentoring, and I work with organizations that develop young people's skills. And I see a planetarium as being one of those places where that can happen. And so I think it's important in developing skills and education. Employment is going to be important. And I think now is going to be one of those times when, like I said before, it's the time when it's everything is aligning, if you will. The stars are aligning for us to be able to do this.
Ryan, final thoughts for you?
Yeah, I did see one other question in the chat I want to answer. Somebody asked where they can watch a modern laser show. Right now, I think it's Buffalo, Detroit, or Rochester are the three domes that come to mind. So you can check those out. But yeah, I just want to say, I think the best way to know what a planetarium can do is to go see one. Go to those three cities. They all have big, beautiful fixed planetariums. McMaster University has a small planetarium. Science North has a small planetarium. Yeah, a shameless plug that I have planetariums I would love you to come see. At the end of the day, wherever you go, I want you to have that experience so that you understand why we need something bigger, why it's valuable, and what it can do, hopefully, for you and everybody.
All right. Well, we appreciate those final thoughts, all three of you, Richard, Kristen, and Ryan. Thanks for your insights.
I have one last thought. Just as noticing in the chat that I'm watching here that Teresa and Rolly used to date at the planetarium. So I'm wondering if I actually did some of the shows when they were there back in the day. So it has been, in many ways, a lot of things come out of the planetarium, including where sometimes romance.
It's a great way to end. Great way to end. Well, let me just close with some of these final remarks. Just a few things to read here. Kind of a takeaway. Tonight reminded us that planetariums are more than places just to look at the stars, like we learned tonight. They're spaces where science, imagination, and community really meet, and we're hoping Toronto is going to be part of that next chapter. I want to do one plug. We've got another big event coming up. This is going to be very cool. This was cool. This is even going to be, can you say more cool or cooler? I guess so. Save the date, April 23rd, 2026, an in-person event. It's an in-person event, a night with Brother Guy Consolmagno. He's a renowned American Jesuit astronomer, planetary scientist, and the former director of the Vatican Observatory since 2015. So he's the Pope's former astronomer, from what I understand. The place and the time to be determined, but sign up for the newsletter at spaceplacecanada.ca. Stay up to date there, and tickets will be limited. And also for tonight, don't forget tonight's webinar will be replayed on our YouTube site. So again, thank you to our speakers. Thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. Again, reminder of that event on the 23rd to get your tickets. And tonight's event will be played back on YouTube. Everyone, have a great starry night.